All right, so let's get into some of the long-term causes of the Great Depression. Now, in just random orders that came into my head, this is how I populated the list. This is by no means meant to be some kind of ranking system on this is the greatest thing. And frankly, I would actually argue the last one, tariffs and trade deficits and problems and a lack of trade, really probably made the Great Depression all that much worse for the entire world, turning it into a global depression. So an overproduction means what we're talking about here is we just keep producing things. If you think back to 1919, when we're in World War I, the United States is essentially the producer of war materials and items and even food through agriculture that the Western Allies needed to pull off a win. And because of our capability to meet these great demands, companies at the end of the war didn't really step back production all that much. It's kind of hard to picture because we haven't really lived through it, or at least many of us haven't. This idea of going from a war economy into a regular capitalist economy again. It's a massive shift. But back then, the companies continued to spurn their advancements, to continue to challenge themselves. Henry Ford, one case in point, he actually gets to where his car can be made in a matter of like a few seconds. I mean, we're talking like less than 30 seconds. You could actually put a car together during the 1920s. That is incredible. That's not just an assembly line adaptation and evolution and our industry making capabilities. That's incredible. So when they don't actually scale things back, farmers, of course, are going to start feeling the pressure first, because farmers, matter of fact, we have these items that we've grown, these items we've produced, these items that we've cured and whatnot, and we want to sell them to people to eat. Other countries don't have the money to buy your food products. And the Americans, we don't have enough mouths to really eat all the stuff that you're capable of producing because of new industrial capabilities, even on the farm. I mean, we're talking massive tractors, massive tills, so on and so forth. There's some really incredible technology that comes out during the 19-teens, 1920s. Americans can't by ourselves take care of all that and eat it. So prices go down. Prices go down pretty drastically. And that's one of the long-term causes. And like say, farmers, again, they will enter the Great Depression much earlier than other folks do. Then we have consumer debt and credit purchasing capabilities. We still have this stuff today, if you think about it. There's a couple more checks on it, and now, if you've read your credit card statement, you actually get a notice on there that says, if you make minimum payments, you'll be paying us for like 28 years or something like that. And, yet nobody really has much interest in doing that, so most people pay more than the minimum payment. Back then, however, having that new credit purchasing and without having like tangible documentation in front of you showing just how long that debt was going to last and how much it was hurting you, all that people really focused on for budgeting, especially inside the inner cities, they were simply looking, okay, I have X amount of money coming in from my income. Great. I can spend that much every week. And they would make sure that whatever they were getting would fit inside that budget, but that was the extent of it. And that becomes very dangerous when you think on it, because in the event of the stock market crash and the fallout after that from unemployment issues, people realize that they're on the hook for basically the majority of their belongings, and they can't actually keep it anymore. So people find themselves thrown out of their home and they become homeless. There's this uneven income distribution, which, America's always had, and I'm guessing probably always will have. There's this funny joke amongst historians that the top 1% actually own more wealth than the other 99%, which everybody knows, but it's by such a gross amount that it keeps widening. And the widening becomes very dangerous, because then those at the top, they lose their humanity and their connection and their empathy capability to those in the middle and lower classes. So there's a whole stream of things that are going to come from uneven income distribution we'll get into. Risky investments. Not just individuals. I mean, sure, we know about biomargin and those problems, yes. Banks too. Banks were actually investing in very risky and very cavalier investment portfolios they should not have been doing, especially when you think on it that they're essentially doing that with people's money. And if you're not familiar with how banks work, they're supposed to have some kind of dividend back, because if I'm going to keep, say, like $10,000 in XY bank, then I expect that $10,000 to become, say, like $10,050 at the end of 6 months. Like something minor, because they can't just take all the money invested. They have to actually have now hard currency on to actually be able to withdraw those funds at any given time. Back then, that wasn't a requirement. Most banks and most savings and loans facilities, another type of bank, they would actually have certificates saying, okay, if you submit your intention to withdraw from our bank with all of your funds, we have 90 days to come up with the actual liquid asset cash to give to you, and then you can take that hard currency wherever you so choose. 90 days. So a lot of banks with these elaborate vaults, they don't always have a lot of money in them. That's a problem. A lot of get-rich-quick mentality and schemes. In your textbook, there's the Charles Ponzi story, which is incredible. The man actually gets a newspaper to start publishing his scheme for him. And, of course, if you read the newspaper, it must be true. Kind of like today's thing where you say, if you read on the internet, it's got to be true as well. Well, yeah, we're being facetious. But in this case, it was said that Columbus had discovered America, but Ponzi discovered American money. And what he ends up doing over the course of 8 months, I think in 1919 to 1920, he takes in something like $15 million of then currency, like worth a lot. But he only returns like $200,000 to investors. But his whole deal was, hey, if anyone gives me $15 or $10, or I guess it was like 10 or 15, and I'm going to invest it for you, and I'm going to work my magic with it, I'm going to turn it into even more after 3 months. Okay, I mean, that sounds like a good deal, right? Because, this investor probably knows more than I do, so we'll go and let them use my money and give me some return on it. That's all fine and dandy, but he didn't actually return hardly any of it. So it becomes very interesting, because later on in Ladies' Home Journal, very famously, there's an article that is titled by, I think, John Raskob, that says, "Everyone ought to be rich," where he explains that if everyone in America were to invest, say, $15 a month, after 20 years, like your working employment time, that would turn into $80,000 for like a nest egg for retirement. And $80,000 back then, that's a lot of money. So, and economists actually start investing and encouraging others to invest in the stock market, because they're saying, Ponzi scheme, that's not very reliable, but the stock market sure is, and we all know how that ended. So in 1929, these get-rich-quick schemes and mentalities that had driven so many people to do some pretty risky stuff with their hard-earned money ends up shooting them in the foot. Next, we have government laissez-faire economics. Now, remember, this is a policy where the government essentially keeps its hands out of the economy, away from business. Very minimal, if any, oversight whatsoever. Now, of course, since the Progressive era, there's a little oversight, but not really that much. And a lot of that is influenced by the Republican presidents who were in charge in the 1920s, who were extreme laissez-faire believers. So what businesses were doing was pretty cheeky. They knew they were overproducing. They knew that they were dropping prices, and so they'd produce even more stuff to meet their bottom line. They knew that workers could be tossed aside to increase their bottom line if they had to in a pinch. So the worker has essentially no value to the company. That's a serious problem too. And the adage goes with Hoover that he does too little too late for the Great Depression. And all that changes in 1933 when Franklin Delano Roosevelt is sworn in, because now government is going to take a look at laissez-faire and toss it aside. Lastly, tariffs and trade. So we mentioned the Hawley-Smoot tariff before, being the highest tariff that the United States ever actually passes. And it's fallback from other countries also creating some pretty ridiculous tariffs of their own. So no one's trading with each other. Well, again, our businesses and our farms are producing so many things. Americans can't physically use it all. It's got to be international communities buying our stuff. And frankly, this leads to this idea in economics to where different regions or different countries will have specialties that, I can make 5,000 bushels of wheat or something, and it only takes me, say, like 4 days. But if your country does it, it's going to take you 10 days. So I have an advantage. So maybe I should specialize in that wheat production, and y'all buy it from me at a decent price. It's still fair. And you trade me something that your sector or your area or your country can make faster and better and more efficiently than I can. And we'll trade that stuff. And that creates this interdependence. And these kinds of relationships economically were already developing in the early 20th century. All right, so those are the long-term causes of the Great Depression. Of course, there's a lot of other things too, and some will argue the stock market crash itself was a cause of the Depression, which, yeah, in a sense it kind of is. I prefer rather to look at it as this is really an announcement that the Great Depression has arrived for everybody. No longer is it just the farmers and some of these smaller earners and low-wage earners will actually be affected. Now pretty much everyone's going to feel it, unless you were a part of that super elite upper class who during the 1930s would do some pretty extravagant things, including host major parties and create a new profession, the actual party planner, with some of the large hotels that still operated throughout the 1930s. So next lesson will include what's going on with conditions during the Depression and the start of FDR's New Deal and reactions to it.